Well, it actually started very, very many years ago. Yeah, in the 80s, I spent many hours and many days and many beautiful weeks in India. Yeah, I was traveling through India and having a look around and getting to know the place, and it's a place that I really love very dearly. Yeah, and at that time, I started studying Indian astrology. Yeah, this is also known as Jyotish yeah, in the world. And I was very interested in Ayurveda, the traditional healing science of India. And we used to go in and out of bookshops. Yeah, I was really into books, and usually when coming back from a trip to India, I'd have suitcases full of books. Yeah, and I still have them up in my bookshelf. Yeah, and on one of these trips to a bookshop, I came across some little book. Yeah, by a he was an Ayurvedic physician, and he was also familiar with astrologer. He was a mystic also, and his name was Bhattacharya. And this Bhattacharya, he at that time, when he wrote the books in the 50s and in the 60s, he had stumbled across a method to. He was a physician, a doctor, yeah, and he came across a way of using light to treat people with certain illnesses. Yeah. Now he had an unusual way of doing it. He didn't even need to have the people there with him. Yeah, he would treat them remotely. And he called this thing that he was doing teletherapy. Tele meaning remote, yeah, and then therapy, yeah, the usual word for therapy. And he developed a whole way of doing this using. At that time, he started off using gemstones. Yeah. Now, he traditionally gemstones are used in India a lot for healing purposes. Yeah. And the gemstones I'm talking about, they're real gemstones like emeralds, diamonds, and rubies, and these blue stones that you get, yeah, pearl, coral, yeah, and all these gemstones. They have a way of reflecting light, yeah. And what he did is he took some information from the people that he was treating, the information being at that time a photo usually. He would ask the people to send him a photo, yeah, or he would ask the people to send him a signature, yeah, and then he would take this photo, and he'd had a board, yeah, and he'd stick the photos onto the board with a pin, and then in front of the board he'd have a rotating disc. And this is all very strange. It's all very strange and very weird and very spooky, yeah, kind of thing, yeah. And at that time, I was very fascinated by this, but I was thinking, well, it's a bit unusual. It's a bit, yeah, it's a bit strange, yeah. But it felt to me there's something to it, yeah. And he documented this actually at that time very well. Yeah, he went to great extent. He classified certain conditions that people were having in terms of a color hunger that the people were having. And he was saying, if you have a certain color hunger, if you are hungry for red, for example, then chances are you will develop some certain group of diseases. And his understanding was that diseases are associated with color deficiency. Just like we know now, certain diseases are due to deficiency in vitamins, for example. Everybody knows if you don't have enough vitamin C, then your teeth fall out, yeah, and then you get bleeding gums, you get scurvy and whatever. But there are actually quite a few diseases nowadays that are known to be dependent, for example, on a deficiency of vitamins. Yeah, but he took it a bit further, and his understanding was that you can have certain diseases, and they respond well if people are given the color that is deficient. Yeah, so that was his understanding, and this was actually based on old medical science from India. This is known in Ayurveda. This is also known in Vedic astrology. And that actually people, especially in cultures like India, not only in India actually, but in other cultures, that traditionally colored gemstones are used for healing purposes. Yeah, this is actually also the reason why, for example, traditionally a king or a queen, they would have a crown, and the crown would be studded with precious gems. Yeah, not just because they look nice, but because the people wanted to protect. Yeah, they saw that these things would give a protection for the person wearing them. Yeah, so even these days it's not uncommon, for example, for a person in India to be given a prescription. They'll go then to a practitioner of Vedic astrology or of Ayurveda, and then they will get a prescription. And the therapist will then say, well, go and get yourself a ruby of this and this size, yeah, and then start wearing it. You actually need to wear it. It actually needs to get into your energy field. Yeah, you can't just have it in the cupboard or somewhere. You need to actually wear it, and you need to let light go through it. And that's how he started originally at that time. Yeah, and he started then with and then he'd had many of these boards, and then one board would be for the red color, and then he'd have a disc rotating there, and then there would be a ruby on the disc. Yeah, and all the people who needed red, they will be getting red. Yeah, and then next to it there'd be another board with then people who needed blue, yeah, or who needed green or whatever. Yeah, and he was finding then that people were responding very well to not immediately, not overnight, yeah, because he was then doing it for weeks and months. Yeah, they were actually being subjected to these color frequencies, yeah, for over a long period of time. And then he was documenting then the results. And anyway, so I picked up these the few books that he had written about this topic, yeah. And he'd also developed the idea a little bit further. His understanding was one could also do it with sound. Yeah, and he had started experimenting with subjecting the samples, because basically the pictures of the people were samples. It's like a sample of the person. Yeah, it's like an essence of the person. Yeah, it's like when you go for a blood test, they'll take a drop of blood or a little bit of blood, and that's your sample, and that represents you. Yeah, and then they'll go and analyze it and then tell you stuff about yourself. So at that time, that was way back in the 80s, yeah, and all these years I'd been at the back of my mind. I'd had this. There will come a time when you need to look into this a little bit more, yeah. And actually, about a year and a half ago, that time kind of come. In fact, I'd moved just into this place, and I'd had all my boxes of books. They needed unpacking. Yeah, and a lot of the books I didn't need anymore, so I was sorting them out. So I was going through every book that I had, and then these 3 books popped up that I had, and then immediately I dropped everything that I was doing and started reading them again. Yeah, and just to get familiar what was the idea. And I said, well, that's actually a great idea. Yeah, and it has great potential. Yeah, and I started looking into what happened to this idea, and did anything get developed any further? And I couldn't really find much. I knew that there was, from my own practice, I'm a naturopathic physician and a neurofeedback therapist and trainer, and I knew that there is such a thing as color therapy, and that it's actually practiced, and it's actually practiced also in allopathic medicine. Yeah, that color therapy, it's a known phenomena. It's not just something, some unusual kind of thing. It's actually something that's known. It's actually been practiced. Every woman knows the power of colorful clothes and the color of your hair and the color of the living room wall, and it's common knowledge. We're living in a sea of colors, so it's not really something that unusual. But this remote aspect is the aspect that is unusual. And it's something that I was troubled by. It troubled me, actually, because I don't like these. I'm more of a practical, pragmatic kind of person. I was thinking, well, how can you do remote? If the person is standing here and being given some rays of color or whatever, that I can understand more readily. But this remote aspect, I found it a bit troublesome. But I was willing to accept that he had written down correct information, and that he had collected this information correctly, and that he was doing good work at that time. Yeah. So anyway, that was like until about a year and a half ago, and then I thought, well, you need to really run some tests. You need to kind of try it out, yeah, and do some things. And I'm a bit of a technically minded person, and I thought, well, really, you need to kind of find some automatic way of doing this, yeah, in a way that's reproducible, that's where you can basically test the concept, yeah. So I started thinking about this whole thing, and one morning I woke up with this idea. Well, you need to make a little box, yeah, and in the box you'll have some samples, and I thought, well, you use some test tubes, yeah, as holders for the samples, and then in these test tubes you put rolls of paper with pictures of people, yeah. So I started talking to people about it and said, well, are you willing to give me a sample, yeah, for this test that I want to do? And then I was thinking, well, in these days of data protection and all this kind of things, and I was thinking, well, you can't take a picture of a person's face, really. Maybe that may be a bit not quite the right way of doing it. So I asked them to give me pictures of their hands, just the palms of your hands, yeah, 2 palms taken like this, yeah. And so I started collecting pictures of people's hands like that, and then I asked somebody to develop some little electronic circuitry where I could create very pure colors, yeah, because my thinking was, well, it's all very well using gemstones, yeah, but gemstones, the wavelengths they vary, yeah, like a green of an emerald is not always the same. You get a green of this wavelength and you get a green of this wavelength. And at that time, when this Dr. Bhattacharya was working, he had actually defined the wavelengths that are the active wavelengths for causing the effects that he wanted to cause, yeah. And I was thinking, well, now we're in the year 2018 or whatever, and technology has advanced. Is it possible to create the same wavelength using LEDs, these light-emitting diodes that we see, yeah? And so I looked into the whole story of LEDs, and funnily enough, I found that the way that LEDs are made, they sometimes use the same chemical compounds that are in gemstones to create the light color or the light wavelength that they are creating. So I thought, well, there must be some kind of relationship between them, and that it's not a question of the gemstone, it's the question of the way that the gemstone handles light, which essentially contains the whole range of colors, yeah, like white, like if you know these experiments, if you take light and then it goes through a prism and then you get a rainbow, yeah, and then the rainbow, you can actually then measure the different wavelengths in the rainbow, and then every color has a certain wavelength, and that's the same way with the gemstones, and it's actually the same way with the LEDs. Yeah, is that you can actually measure the wavelength, and the LEDs are sold according to the wavelength that they have. And you can get an LED that creates green light, and it has exactly the same wavelength as an emerald. So I think, well, yeah, then if that's the case, then I can standardize the whole procedure, and I can get really pure kind of wavelengths and pure frequencies, and then on that basis I can start testing the theory. But I needed then some electronic control device that would allow me to, without me being there over weeks and months, to subject the samples, this group of samples in that case, because one box contains 81 samples, so that I could then just have the box full of these pictures from the people, without them having a specific need. Now at the Bhattacharya, at his time, he was dealing with people with an illness. When I started testing this, I wasn't dealing with illness. My idea was, is it possible through this method to create greater well-being? Is it possible to enhance the quality of life for the people? Is it possible to make people feel more balanced? That was my focus at that time, and it's actually still my focus, because I think these things are quite important. So I wasn't subjecting them to specific colors like just red. I was giving them groups of colors. So what I was trying to do was, in the morning they were getting a certain group of color. At around midday they were getting a certain group of colors, and then towards the evening they were getting a certain group of colors. And this light was pulsed. It wasn't just kind of the light was the colors were shining. They were pulsed, and they were pulsed also at certain rates. And so during a day they were actually, and they still are, because this project is still running, they were getting, during the course of a day, they were getting just about equal amounts of the different colors of the rainbow. So then eventually I had to think of a name for what it is for the approach that I'm kind of taking. And I was kind of thinking of all kinds of names, and then because I live here in nature, you can see what it's like here. So I look at nature a lot, and being in a forest, you kind of you see how everything grows upwards, and grows upwards towards the light. So then I thought, well, okay, growing towards the light is maybe quite a good thing, because the samples are in the box and they're down, and from above they are radiated with the different colors. So the light is on above and the samples are below, so they're kind of growing towards the light. So I thought, that's maybe a good name, and that's how the name growing towards the light kind of came up. I think it explains the concept that I'm trying to move along. That it's possible maybe that we can orient ourselves to light more than towards what often happens dark. Because many people become, for some sad reason, they become oriented towards dark, and maybe we can turn that around and help people grow towards the light. And it's definitely a process. This whole thing, it's a process where people can maybe, and there are indications of this from feedback that I've had, where they can maybe become more in tune with what it means to grow towards the light, and to go into interaction with this thing. It's a very subtle. It's something very tremendously subtle. It's very, very delicate kind of thing, but the results have been very promising from this general level, because I started off on a very general level of saying, well, let's see if we give people a wide band rainbow. So it's like sitting under a rainbow. So basically over a whole day.